My name is Massimo Greco, and welcome to a screencast. This is on my Supreme Court case, Bush v. Gore. This is a very controversial case. It had to be between Vice President Al Gore and George W. Bush. So moving on, what were the constitutional questions? And that was, why did George W. Bush appeal to the Supreme Court after the initial recount process? And how was Al Gore harmed by it? And how was George Bush harmed by it? And what was Bush's real contention and his real reasons for doing this? So the two parties in this case were the Democratic Party, Al Gore's political party, who wanted the recount process to continue going because even though the Secretary of State at the time had already certified the election results in the state, the Republican Party wanted to go along with what was certified because they believed that once you certify the election results, it's over and there's no need to go back. And that's why they appealed to this case. So how did it get here? The initial results showed Bush leading in Florida by 1,784 votes, or 0.5%. Really, really close. 0.5%. That is the threshold that's needed to automatically trigger machine recount. We saw this in Georgia in the 2020 presidential election, where Joe Biden won, but by less than 0.5%, which is why the machine recount was necessary. This recount saw Bush leading by just 317 votes over Gore. Gore then asked for a manual recount in 4 counties: Volusia County, Miami-Dade County, Orange County, and Broward County. The recount was not finished by the time Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State, certified the election results, and that result showed Bush leading by 537 votes. Gore then went ahead and sued Harris because the results had not been finished by the time she certified the election results and appealed to the state's Supreme Court. They went ahead and sided with Gore and ruled that this was an illegal act under the Secretary of State, and they immediately demanded the recount process to continue going. Bush then appealed to the Supreme Court, which had a different point of view on it. They immediately halted the recount and wanted the election process to continue moving. So the justices, moving from left to right, we have Antonin Scalia, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, John Paul Stevens, David Souter, William Rehnquist, Clarence Thomas, Sandra Day O'Connor, Stephen Breyer, and then Anthony Kennedy. Stevens, Ginsburg, Breyer, and Souter dissented to this case. We'll see why later on. The majority side was on the side of Bush. They claimed that Florida had violated the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and they ruled in favor of that claim by a 7-2. In a 5-4 vote, they also ruled that they could not continue recounting the election results because of the fact that they wanted the election process to continue moving, because at the time the Electoral College meeting was about to start. And was there a bad opinion on the ruling? Yes. John Paul Stevens, he argued that this had contradicted various principles of federalism, and even asked, why are we halting this? Because this doesn't seem like a thing that a federal country would do. And Souter had a similar view, saying that the court shouldn't have interrupted the process of the initial vote. What were the short and long-term consequences? The recount was halted, and Bush won the election. Florida had 25 electoral votes at the time, and because of the fact that if you win a state, you get all of the electoral votes from the state, which is why this was such a necessary court case. Because of the fact that Florida was the last state to be called, and whoever essentially won Florida won the presidency, this court case essentially handed the win straight over to Bush. Gore won in states such as New Mexico and Oregon over the following days of this process. Those only counted up to 12 electoral votes. He could not win without Florida. The fact that those two states that he won Oregon and New Mexico, were very small and didn't really have much of an impact. As of course, at the time, yes, both of these two states were swing states. Nowadays, they are reliably Democratic states. The public, after this case, protested in front of the Supreme Court, condemning the decision, and a lot of people had lost their trust in the electoral system as well as the Supreme Court itself. As the Supreme Court now has played a very pivotal role in deciding our elections and is now seen a sign of democratic backsliding, meaning our process and our democracy has shifted towards autocracy and authoritarianism. So why is it important? We could see more of this change in our democracy now, especially with Brett Kavanaugh getting appointed to the Supreme Court. He and a bunch of the other justices could crack down on elections and recounts, especially in those states where they do mail-in ballots. He could declare those illegal and say that now all people must report to a poll station in order to cast their ballots, which would make it much more favorable to the Republican Party rather than the Democratic Party. And does the Supreme Court represent the will of the majority? It absolutely does not in any way, shape, or form. It depends on the justices who are sitting on the court and hearing the hearings. They have their own views and don't listen to the public's opinion on the case because they're the ones making the decision. We see this in a lot of different controversial topics, such as Dobbs v. Jackson, the court case that overturned Roe v. Wade, which was the case that essentially said that all 50 states must follow this specific thing, granting abortions to every state. Now, as that case was overturned and Dobbs v. Jackson is now in place, now it's up to the states to decide how could abortions be decided. And now we immediately see the southern states immediately declare them illegal. That case sent the public into an outrage. Even moderates protested this, stating that they believed that it should be up to the woman and not up to the government to take care of abortion. So even though they can protest and they have their right to do so, they cannot do anything about it because the Supreme Court is the one who made the decision, and now the people have to live with it. And here's my works cited page. Thank you very much for listening to my screencast.